People think that when they get up in front of a group, they have to adopt some type of whole new personality. They have to be a different person. And what we show them is it's about being you, the person that you are. And when you learn to do that, what you realize is that things like accents just add. They add to color. It's the type of thing that people really appreciate, and it's the type of thing that really helps get your message across in a sincere way. Finally, and here's the tough part again for people to believe first time out, and that is it's actually in the pause where you create your entire presentation. For 99% of all business speakers, you're up here talking, and the most important thing on your mind is always the next thing you're going to say. So you're always processing that next thing. And while you're processing that next thing to say, of course, there are words coming out of your mouth. The quality of those words coming out of your mouth are severely eroded by the fact that you're trying to come up with that next thing you're going to say. With this method of lock, talk, and pause, it's about never thinking 5 minutes down the road, 1 minute down the road, 15 seconds down the road. What you're always thinking about, the most important thing on your mind, is the next time you're going to pause. See, I only have to keep track of, oh, that's right, one thought. I have to keep track of one thought, and who am I giving it to? I'm not trying to distribute it all around once a second. I'm giving that one thought to one person. I'm maintaining eye contact with that person through that thought. There, it's done. And when you're only creating that one thought at a time, what happens is you find that the quality of the words that come out of your mouth tends to increase. You tend to speak in fully structured sentences. You tend to say things that create a sentence that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, typically a subject, some action, and an object. You tend to say fewer words, but the words that you do say are much more full of meaning because you're not just appending on, appending on, appending on. It only works when the most important thing on your mind is the next time you're going to pause. So here's what happens. The benefit, of course, is when you do engage people one-on-one, when you're able to look people in the eye, you send a message not of being anxious, but of being confident. Because obviously you can't look somebody in the eye unless you feel right about what you're going to say. And so when you send this message of confidence, it makes the audience, instead of being uncomfortable by watching all your nervous reactions, it helps to make them more comfortable. The other thing you do, of course, when you look people in the eye is we send this message of sincerity. And then finally, when indeed, no matter how big your group, when you can indeed look them in the eye and talk, when you can think in these nice structured sentences, when you give people the time to hear what you last said before you ask them to build onto that with the next bit of information, you are able to create a two-way communication with your audience. And this two-way communication, because you're sending the message that you, oh, that's right, I'm actually talking, that presenter's actually talking to me. I mean, he wasn't talking to me the whole time, but he kept coming back to me. And you get the impression that the presenter actually cares about you as an audience member, learning, understanding what he has to say. And so what you do is you end up creating a bond with the audience that is so totally unlike the relationship you have when you are spewing into the ether, never holding eye contact. So it changes your whole approach. And what happens is you then end up getting huge amounts of positive feedback when people look at you rather than looking out to an audience. And those times where you do maybe hold eye contact for a couple seconds, what do you typically see? You see people with their heads down working their BlackBerries or doing anything other than being engaged with you. It works both ways. It's a win-win. You feel better, you're processing a lot less, your anxiety is way down, and the audience is getting the benefits of knowing that you're making them comfortable and you're telling the truth. When you're doing it right, it's always a win-win for both the audience and the speaker. The reason a pause is so important is the pause when you speak is equivalent to the paragraph in the written word. It's that simple. How many people like to read textbooks that have nothing but solid text over a page? No breaks, no anything? I remember some chemistry books, physics books. You know, you look at a page, it's completely filled with text, no breaks whatsoever. Your brain looks at it and goes, no, I don't think so, and you close the book. Now, you take a newspaper. Think about a newspaper. Anybody know how many sentences there are in the average newspaper paragraph? 2. USA Today, 1. But really, pick up a newspaper, and the average numbers of sentences in paragraph is 2. Because why? Well, newspapers are in the business of trying to deliver new information to people quickly. They know they have one shot to give it to you, because most people don't hold on to newspapers. They don't, they're not reference material. They read them through, and then they toss them in the trash on their way off the train. So the process of getting information, a lot of new information to people quickly, involves being able to parcel it out into nice little bite-sized morsels that the brain can ingest. The paragraph is a big key to that. Think about it. When a paragraph comes out, you read across paragraph, 1 sentence, 2 sentences, and then what do you get? You get nice white space. That white space is brain rest. And then even before we ask you to take in more information, we give you a little more white space, a little more brain rest. That's what a paragraph's all about. Well, the pause in speech works exactly the same way. That in order to get your audience to really take in what you have to say, you got to learn to stop talking. Stop talking long enough for them to ingest that last thing you said, get a picture of it, try to put it into a context that they know before moving on to the next thing you're going to say.
And it also provides for those few times that maybe you do run out of something to say and you pause. Well, if you're like most people and you talk on and on and on and on, continually on, eventually your mouth can outrun your brain. And then when that happens, the pause that comes because you can't think of what you're going to say next can be very pregnant.
The pause is absolutely the most important thing you can do. People have a hard time appreciating that because they think that speaking is about speaking. You learn to establish the pace. You learn that what speaking is all about is finding one person, giving one thought, and then having one pause. One pause long enough for them to ingest the last thing you said. One person, one thought, one pause.
And then finally, probably the most important thing is by breaking information down and giving people these frequent, constant chances to hear that last thing, it helps them to build a picture of what you're talking about in their mind. In other words, they take a building block, they hear that, all right, got that, rest, all right, and the next thing you say, they build on top of that, next thing you say, you build on top of it. And people can much more clearly not just hear what you say, but they in this picture, they can engage a lot more senses. They can become part of it. And your message gets through much more deeply.
Mark Twain gets a lot of things attributed to him that he never said, but one of the things he did say was that the right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause. Somebody shout out the name of somebody in public life that they would consider to be a good public speaker.
Barack Obama. Barack Obama understands the power of the pause. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton, I'd go with that. Anybody else?
Okay, Reagan, Colin Powell. Interesting. I won't go there. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton is a name that often rises to the top. People think of Bill Clinton, regardless of what we think of his politics, which we won't get into. Regardless of what you think of his politics, most people consider Bill Clinton to be a good public speaker. And the reality is that Bill Clinton was, some poor kid from Arkansas that made it to a pretty high office, President of the United States. Because one thing Bill Clinton knows how to do is speak. And when you analyze Bill Clinton's speeches, if you ever have a chance to see him speak, or if you go on the internet and type in Bill Clinton video, you can find him all over the place. In fact, I encourage you to do that when you leave here. Type in Bill Clinton video. Look at any example of Bill Clinton speaking. Bill Clinton is thought of as a great speaker, and he is a great speaker. Bill Clinton is the master of the pause.
I'm going to play for you a segment of Bill Clinton's inauguration speech in 1997. And what I want you to do is I want you to, feel free to close your eyes if you want, but I want you to listen to and count the number of words he says in a row before pausing. And we'll try to get a consensus here of the average number of words he says together before he pauses.
My fellow citizens, at this last presidential inauguration of the 20th century, let us lift our eyes toward the challenges that await us in the next century. It is our great good fortune that time and chance have put us not only at the edge of a new century in a new millennium, but on the edge of a bright new prospect in human affairs. A moment that will define our course and our character for decades to come. We must keep our old democracy forever young. Guided by the ancient vision of a promised land, let us set our sights upon a land of new promise. The promise of America was born in the 18th century out of the bold conviction that we are all created equal. It was extended and preserved in the 19th century when our nation spread across the continent, saved the Union, and abolished the awful scourge of slavery. Then, in turmoil and triumph, that promise exploded onto the world stage to make this the American century. And what a century it has been.
What was his average, would you say? 5? Well, there were some times he would go 8, but did you hear how many times he went 2? And a lot of times 3. And you'd hear those words, and then boom, you'd have that pause. And so when it was over, you actually heard everything that he said. When you hear a person speak like that, you can follow, can't you? And not only follow it, but, well, I think it was fairly well proved. Most people were rather moved by Bill Clinton. In fact, Bill Clinton had the ability to get up there and give a speech, and if you didn't know better, you'd believe him. Yeah. The guy knows what he's doing. He's the master of the pause. The interesting thing about Clinton is his handlers showed him films of, can anybody guess the person Clinton thinks of his mentor? JFK. Anybody in the audience old enough to remember Jack Kennedy? He was the president of the United States. John Kennedy was a very significant person in the speaking world because he was really the bridge. He was the bridge from the old style, the old oratory style, to the new humanistic style.
I have chosen this time and place to discuss a topic on which ignorance too often abounds and the truth too rarely perceived. And that is the most important topic on earth, peace. I speak of peace because of the new face of war. Total war makes no sense in an age where great powers can maintain large and relatively invulnerable nuclear forces and refuse to surrender without resort to those forces. It makes no sense in an age where a single nuclear weapon contains almost 10 times the explosive force delivered by all the Allied air forces in the Second World War. It makes no sense in an age when the deadly poisons produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of the globe and to generations yet unborn.
Jack Kennedy spoke in groups of words, 3, 4, or 5 words at most, with a space, a pause between each one. And that was the model that Bill Clinton used and uses today when he speaks. Anybody know what this is? Carnegie Hall. Anybody know how to get there? Practice, 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 exactly.
Well, what I'm here to tell you is that with lock, talk, and pause, is the last thing you want to do is practice, practice, practice. In fact, the best presentations are given when the presenter has a great body of knowledge but hasn't spent a moment thinking about what she's going to say. In other words, the best presentations occur when you could give the same presentation a dozen times, and every time, hopefully it's different. Because every time, if you're doing it right, you're just dealing with those thoughts that come to you from your own internal knowledge base at the moment. You're always living in that moment because you know that the pauses that you have provide plenty of time to come up with that one thought, which is the next one out of your mouth. Every one of you here has within you the ability to create that one thought on the spot.
because that's what you're doing anyway, only you've got 6, 8, 10 of them, and you're trying to juggle them all around, and you're trying to come out with one. And what we're saying here is that that's working too hard. By the way, anybody ever hear Bill Clinton's buddy Al Gore speak? Do we like Al Gore? Do we think of Al Gore as being a great speaker? Al Gore spoke at the 2000 convention when he did his acceptance speech for the presidential nomination. Al Gore had his 130-point program for America that he thought was very important to get out. I'm serious. That's what he called it, 130-point. And he had 45 minutes to speak. And so he started out, and Al Gore spoke for 45 minutes straight without ever pausing for a moment. And what happened was, during the first 20 minutes of his speech, people hearing things that they like would applaud. They'd try to applaud. But then they found that although they would applaud, he wouldn't stop speaking. And so then it became something they felt very uncomfortable with because they were talking over him. They were applauding over him. And so for the last 20 minutes of his speech, he spoke and nobody applauded at all. He just spoke for 20 minutes straight, not a single break. And I think if you were to give a pop quiz to the audience and ask them how many of those 130 points for America people could remember, probably was no more than 3. So it's about eye contact. Effective speaking requires finding one person in the audience to whom you're going to give a thought. Give that entire thought to one person. Carry on a series of one-on-one conversations with each and every member of the audience, and then learning how to pause, giving them a moment for all that to sink in before you move on to the next person. If we were to ask at the end of your last presentation how each of these 3 aspects affected the audience or impacted the audience, how do you think these 3 items would add up to, say, 100%? How important are each one of these? What you had to say, what you sounded like when you said it, or how you looked? Survey says how you look. 55% of the impact you have in the audience is based on how you look. And not, was she wearing an Armani suit? Did she have diamond? It's how did the speaker comport herself? Did she look comfortable? Did she look confident? Same thing when it comes to how you sound. 38% of your impact is how you sound. And what you have to say? Not that much. How you sound sends those same type of images because people know that if somebody can say something in a nice, strong voice, that they probably believe it. Most of us aren't very good at saying things we don't believe or saying things we're not sure of in a very loud voice. Think of times when you go to a party, you're introduced to a whole bunch of people, and then throughout the night, somebody comes up, you go, "Hi, Bob, how you going? Good party? Yeah. Hi, Sally, having a good time?" Then you see somebody you don't quite know. "Hey, how are you?" We tend to mumble through, don't we? Anybody like to sing in the car? Radio comes on, sing in the car? When you're alone, what kind of volume do you sing at? Pretty high. How about when somebody else is in the car? Yeah. See, when we're by ourselves, it really doesn't matter. We don't have to worry about how good our voice is, but when we're not sure how we sound, we tend to throttle it back, right? So just like eye contact sends strong signals about credibility, our voice, the volume we put behind the words, says loads about how strongly we feel, how confident we feel in the words we say. The unfortunate thing about this study here, of course, is most presenters spend all their time coming up with what they're going to say. They think it's all about what they say. Most of the presentations we see, and most of the presenters we see, are hamstrung by the fact that they try to say way too much in a presentation. They try to get across way too many sets of facts, especially those about which they don't really strongly know or believe or are passionate about. Anybody know who Peggy Noonan is? Anybody know that name, Peggy Noonan? She was a speechwriter for President Reagan. She writes a column in the Wall Street Journal. She's written a number of books on public speaking. One of her favorite sayings when talking about the audience is that they won't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Pretty simple saying, but it's strong when you think about it. Audiences are moved by your passion. In fact, passion is really the only thing that people listen to. People need to know how strongly you believe in what you say. And when you believe in something, they're going to be moved by it. Great speakers know that. Bill Clintons of the world know that. that the words, the 130-point program for America is worthless, a 3-point program for America about what you could really speak with some tremor, some depth, with some confidence is what's going to move people.
It's not about your message, it's about how you say it. So what this is leading to is how then, once you've established this eye contact so that the audience believes you and you make them comfortable, and once you've realized that it's all in the pause where you're going to be creating your next thought, one thought at a time, delivered to one person at a time, how then do you take it to the next level and get people emotionally involved?
Gestures go back to rule number 2. When you're doing it right, it's a win-win for both the speaker and the audience. Remember the 3 rules. If you're working too hard, you're doing it wrong. When you're doing it right, it's a win-win. And third, people only start listening when you stop talking. But the way gestures work as a win-win is when you actually get your body involved to paint a picture of what you're saying.
What I mean by this is that for the audience, using gestures allows them to see a better picture of what you're trying to say, or at the same time for the presenter, it gives the presenter an opportunity to get rid of all this excess energy that's running through. Every time you move a muscle, we're burning calories. We're burning up this energy. And by being able to move your body, get the body involved, you dispense with much of that excess energy.
What happens with the audience is it involves more of their senses. I mean, I could get up to the podium and I could tell you all about all the great things that are going to happen here. And I can do it. But of course, the trouble with podiums is when your hands get attached, it's the 10,000 volts and they never come off. So you can't really get the rest of your body involved. So now you have this static picture of somebody speaking. But when you get your body involved, you involve more senses. You get people to, that's right. And we all know that we remember so much of what we hear, but we remember significantly more about what we hear and see. We actually remember most about what we hear, see, and do, which is why in training we often try to do exercises to get people involved, but we increase significantly the impact we have on audiences when we engage more of their senses. And gestures will do just that.
Also, you can tend to reinforce words so that you just don't talk, well, it's very important that we get our profits up and we get our costs down. You say it's very important that we get our profits up here and we get our costs down here. Because see, it's a difference between, we have your sales up. We get sales up here and our costs down here. The difference between sales and costs is profit. And profit, oh, that's right, that's where profit sharing comes from.
So we reinforce words and they make them stronger than just the sounds coming out of our voice.
And also, using your body, getting your body involved is a good way to overcome occasional attention gaps on the part of the audience. Anybody here willing to admit that since the start of this program that they had maybe a thought or two outside this room? I'm hurt.
In fact, I'm done. Thank you. No, stop. They want me to go. Attention gaps. Again, we're multitaskers. We're sent to presentations. We're sent to hear people talk, and yet we've got all kinds of things in our minds, like that call that we didn't make to the client, or that report that has to get out, or that's right, maybe we were even thinking about that little discussion we had with our spouse before we left the house this morning.
Nobody comes to a presentation carrying this excess of attention.
You never have 100%. You have maybe 85 if you're lucky. Well, the point is, so with these different attention, and when audiences lose attention, one of the problems is they'll drift off, they'll start thinking about something else. And then when they do start to come back, they hear something and they go, what was that? And then they start trying to think what the last thing you said. Of course, you're still speaking, and so now the attention gap still continues because they're thinking about something and you're talking about something different. The point is, by using gestures, being able to fill attention gaps, people can see, and sometimes you just get over that gap and you don't lose them once again. Audiences, we give audiences all the opportunities they want to go off on these journeys of self-discovery. Your job is to keep them all on your particular path.
The energy that you throw out works not just to your benefit because you're getting rid of that nervous energy, but it works for the audience's benefit because you're more comfortable and they're more comfortable.
Now, what happens, unfortunately, is that people often engage in gestures that aren't very effective. One we see here, there's the arrogant stance.
You see this is the CEO, or this is the one that, we call it the George Patton stance. You know this one?
No poor bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won a war by making some other poor dumb bastard die for his country. It sends a signal of arrogance, which most people don't. Like this one, we call the phone booth, crossed arms. This is one that we see a lot. This is probably the most common thing people do when they get up is they tend to hug themselves, you know. This is comfortable, actually. I like this. Actually, I love me. This is good, yeah. I feel really secure like this. But the problem is if I try to talk about having to get sales up and we have to get our expenses down, you know, you're limited by having your arms completely locked together in terms of the impact that you can have. So, and again, think about this. Think where the energy is going now when I'm like this. It just, or even when we do this, you know, the prisoner. We often see this.
Well, here's one we see. We call this the fig leaf, which is not. We see more men do this than women.
The only thing worse than the fig leaf is the talking fig leaf. You know, when they start to do the gestures and they do. One of the most common things you see, we have the key changer. Where, because, and again, men probably more than women are more comfortable when they have their hands in their pockets. Johnny Carson used to have his hand in his pocket. Is anybody old enough to remember Johnny Carson? Okay. And he would often talk like this, had one hand in his pocket. Fortunately, Johnny Carson is a great example of, and when I told you before, you'll never look at a presenter in the same way again. The problem is that all the rules that we talk about, all the ways to do things right, are often broken by people who can. Those people who can break rules because they have what we don't, and that's called charisma. It's true. Believe me. We've been trying to quantify charisma for 20 years. If we could, we'd package it, put it in a class, and charge $100,000 a day for it. Because you could go on to be president if you had charisma. You could be like Bill Clinton, and if you have charisma, you can get away with almost anything. One of the things people with charisma can get away with is breaking the rules when it comes to speaking. Johnny Carson had a lot of charisma. You could do that. But the point is, hands in your pockets are not a great thing. First of all, if you notice this, if I were to shake my pockets, notice that you don't hear anything. Often when somebody's shaking the pocket, the audience are going, hey, it sounds like a couple quarters, dime. See? He's got about 85 cents in there, I think. What do you think? So if I were to shake mine, you wouldn't hear anything, because as a professional, what I do is I empty my pockets before speaking. But the trouble, of course, with the hands in the pockets, it restricts your ability to reinforce a word. So you try to talk about, we got to get our sales up, we got to get our costs down, want the whole company together on this, all right? The idea with gestures is to always have as much air under the wings available as possible. And the only way you can really do that is to put your hands to what we call the neutral position. You just let them drop by your side. You just have to learn to not think about them so that when you do want to make a point, they're right there to do it. So typically it's just this, feet shoulder width apart, hands to neutral, unless you're using them to gesture. That's simple. If you can't do anything that you learned here today, if you do nothing else, you've taken nothing home, you learn this one, is that all great communicators knew how important it was to smile. When we talk about eye contact, we talk about, really, I always preface it by saying in Western civilizations, Western cultures, we tend to associate eye contact with telling the truth. But there are other cultures where eye contact is not appropriate, or eye contact has more rules. Typically in Asia, cultures there demand a certain level of equality with the person who's looking you in the eye. If you're in Japan and you work for the company as a middle manager, you can't look the CEO in the eye, right? Just that's how it works. Well, there was a woman from Africa who explained to me that in her country, what it came down to was this, that if you didn't look somebody in the eye, they didn't trust you. If you looked them in the eye too long, they didn't trust you. So the whole key was maintaining eye contact and smiling, because the eye contact showed the trust, but the smile disarmed any threat that people felt by holding eye contact, which I thought was pretty interesting. Yeah, many times the body language of the audience will tell you how you're doing. Looking out to an audience, seeing many people asleep is usually not a good thing. That usually comes from speaking without passion. It comes from speaking in a monotone. Tone and inflection are not only important to get people involved, but the interesting thing about tone and inflection is it's true that the exact same words with different inflections on different words changes the meaning. I didn't say he stole the money. 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 We could say the same things, same exact words, and here's the problem you get into with scripts, or if you